Hello, everyone. Happy Monday here on the Southside Beat. My name is Chris Halicke. Thank you for joining me today. If you're watching live here on our YouTube channel here on DK Pittsburgh Sports, and if you're not watching live, I appreciate you listening to it. So we were going to introduce new co-host Greg McAfee today. That is going to have to be postponed one day because, well, Greg was at PNC Park covering the Pirates win over the Mets with Jose over there across the river. So Greg will be on tomorrow. He'll make his debut on the show tomorrow. So you got me. You're stuck with me for one more day. I know. So appreciate everybody tuning in and either watching or listening. And one thing we have not really talked much about this so far this summer, especially during this time where it's just like, okay, what all are we going to talk about? We really haven't mentioned a lot of fantasy football, and obviously don't want to, go too far into, down that rabbit hole because, well, it can be pretty intense and it can be, we can get far away from Steelers stuff. So at least if you're a Steelers fan, which, if you're watching the show, I would presume you are, you probably would like to have some Steelers players on your fantasy team, whether it's for fun, whether it's to try to win some money. So I'm here to try to, at least give you some options for Steelers players that you should take, that you should steer clear of. You don't want to be too biased when it comes to fantasy football, especially if you're like trying to win money. Like, you can't just be like, oh yeah, I think like, if I have like 3 or 4 Steelers on my team, that it's gonna, I like, no, man, you gotta do the right thing. You gotta be able to take the right players. That might have to include having a Baltimore Raven or a Cleveland Brown or Cincinnati Bengal on your team. It's just part of it. So, yeah, I'll get into some of those options here real quick. I'm a fantasy football lover. I love playing. I play in multiple leagues every single year. I have my own league that I run, which is there's no money involved in that one. That one's mainly for fun. It's always been just a fun league. I've been running that one for probably, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years now. And so it's just for fun. But I'm in another one with a handful of reporters that are also in Pittsburgh. Dale is one of them, for those of you who know Dale Lawley. And so I'm in, and that one is for money. So that one I take a little bit more seriously because I'm like, okay, and last year I didn't just break even. I made a little bit of money because I finished third place. I made a whole, enough to go get a fast food meal. So, and B Phil here says that, this is the right approach here. I've drafted Jackson the last 2 years. Might as well get the fantasy points. Absolutely. Now I can, go and talk overall strategy here if you want me to, at least what I think is a good strategy. And I typically have pretty decent success in fantasy, whether it be in any money leagues I've played in or in the league that I run. The league that I run, I am the best way I can really describe myself there is I'm the early 90s Buffalo Bills, the late 80s and early 90s Buffalo Bills. I get to the championship game a lot and then I lose. The last time that happened wasn't last season, but the season before. And if what happened with DeMar Hamlin didn't happen, I most likely would have won. And it just didn't work. So Brian says Kelsey first worked out great for me. I'm glad it worked out good for you because it did not work out for a lot of people. Like, I'm talking about like the people, because Travis Kelsey was like, last year he was considered to be like a top 5 pick or even top 3 pick for some people. And no way. I would do that. Not even on a tight end. I don't care how good the tight end is. I could not do it. I just couldn't. So, yeah. And so, and you guys are funny. Rick's got a good question here before I start going to players. The real question is what Smith's go-to at the goal line. Talking about Arthur Smith and what he can do, what his go-tos at the goal line are going to be. And this is where I think this is kind of where you go into legitimate Steelers fantasy options here. When it comes to Arthur Smith, the one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to be predictable. So you don't want to have, I would even say you don't want to have a go-to in the goal line, because then you're essentially telling the defense, we're going for this guy. I think if Arthur Smith has his way, he can utilize Pat Freiermuth. He can utilize Darnell Washington. He can utilize George Pickens on a fade, or shoot, man, run it in with either Najee or Jalen Warren. Like, I think that if Arthur Smith had his way, he would have a number of options, not necessarily have a go-to. To have plays set up that, depending on the defense that you see, I'm assuming we're not talking about just lining up at the 1 yard line, because at that point it's just the offensive line needs to win better. Because Najee is more than capable of getting into the goal line. I would even say Jalen's more than capable of getting past the goal line. Breaking the plane there if the offensive line just does its job. But in terms of a go-to option, I have a hard time pinpointing on one. You would think like Pat Freiermuth would be an easy go-to because, well, he's a tight end, and tight ends are typically really good weapons in the red zone. And you could say the same thing about Darnell Washington with his size. So you could say those maybe, but I don't know, man. Like, I think if Arthur Smith had his way, he's going to have multiple options there, which kind of leads me into overall fantasy like do's and don'ts when it comes to the Steelers. The number one guy, if you're looking for a Steeler that should be taken first, it would be George Pickens. 100%. I would take George Pickens. Of all the Steelers, the earliest I would take him, it would be Pickens. Might not do the best for you in PPR leagues, points per reception leagues. But the yards per catch is great. I would assume he's going to be a good target. When you talk about red zone targets, he will be one of those guys in the red zone as well, with his size, with his leaping ability, his body control, how he can win in contested catch situations. George Pickens to me is the go-to guy. I don't know if I would quite classify him as a legitimate number one receiver, which would mean, I would say in a standard 10-team league, in order to legitimately be a number one receiver, you've got to be one of the 10 best receiving options. And I don't think Pickens is quite there. You can make a case for it, but I don't know if I would quite put him in that realm just yet. High end number 2, 100%. I think if you're able to get another guy, it doesn't necessarily have to be a Justin Jefferson or Tyreek Hill, but if you can get one of those other elite guys and somehow also turn around and get George Pickens as your number 2, that's the most ideal situation. Your top 2 receivers would be amazing. If your number 1 receiver was Pickens and your running backs were really, really good, like you really sold out for running back and you got 2 really good running backs and you were able to get George Pickens as your number 1, you could probably get away with it. But I would not go in and just automatically assume that you could take George Pickens at the end of the first round or beginning of the second round and just be like, yeah, that's my number 1 receiver. I wouldn't quite put him in that category yet. Trending in the right direction, lots of potential. But I would not spend a first or second round pick. Maybe if you're near the end of the second round, if you had a high draft pick in the first round in a typical snake draft, if you're picking first or second or third overall, and by the next time you come around, you're near the end of the second, maybe you can get away with taking Pickens there, depending on what's left. But I wouldn't quite. That's about the max I'd go right now. I think he's a really solid third round pick in most drafts in like a 10 team league, maybe 12 team. Yeah. And Brian brings up the next guy. Honestly, if we're talking, actually, I'm not even going to get into the next guy, but in terms of player, Pat Freiermuth would be my next guy. Well, I don't know about my next. I would call him my best sleeper. I'd put it that way. Yeah, I think that would be my number one sleeper would be Pat Freiermuth. I wouldn't quite put him number 2 or even number 3 option. I think in Arthur Smith's offense and with better quarterback play, Freiermuth should be a better fantasy option. I think he would. I just have a hard time saying, yes, he's worth being a low end number 1 tight end. I think if you're able to shore up tight end, obviously with one of the top guys, if you get a Kelsey or a Kittle or any of the other top tight ends, and you're able to also manage, getting Freiermuth later, yeah, he's worth being a number 2 tight end, I think, for sure. If you want to risk him being your number 1 tight end, you're probably going to have to. It's got to be near the end of when the tight ends, all the teams have pretty much gotten their, have got their tight end. And it's not because I don't believe in his ability. I think he's more than capable of being one of the most productive pass catching tight ends. It's just there are still some question marks. I would think that he would be better this year because, for the reasons I just mentioned, better quarterback play. Arthur Smith is the offensive coordinator, so big time upgrade at coordinator. But if Russell Wilson is the quarterback and Pat Freiermuth is mainly used in the middle of the field, I have a lot of questions about how Russell Wilson will get the ball to the middle of the field on a regular basis. And let's face it, if you're playing fantasy football, especially in today's day and age, in which more and more leagues are going the PPR route, volume matters. And if Pat Freiermuth's not getting volume, he's not very valuable. So I think he can be valuable. I would put him more in the sleeper category. Now that I've really thought about it, might be worth like a sleeper. Yeah, I think that's a good one. My number 2 option, honestly, for the entire Steelers is their defense. George Pickens number 1, and then Steelers defense number 2. I think the Steelers defense is worthy of being one of the number 1 defenses. Now I never advocate for taking a defense. I mean, I don't even like going into like the single digit rounds to take a defense. I'd prefer to wait until round 10 at the earliest to take a defense. But if you are one of those ones where you want to make sure that you get your defense taken care of, the Steelers defense might be one of them. I think the defense is going to be better. They're going to rack up sacks. If Minkah Fitzpatrick is back playing center field where he's supposed to be, then he might get more interceptions. More interceptions means more fantasy points. I think it's a solid defense. I think it's a top 5 defense in terms of fantasy. The ability to and Brian goes probably the best way here. He says, I go matchups for defense. I do too. I'm not always hey, let me just go ahead and try to get the number 1 defense. If I can get it, that's the way the draft falls, then great. Then that's what I do. Then that's one less thing you have to worry about on a week-to-week basis. But yeah, I don't advocate. It's not a defense that's worth like, oh, it's a 7th round, I'm going to take a defense. No, don't do that. So yeah, I think it's a top 5 fantasy defense. Worthy when you start getting to defenses, worthy of being taken. If you like the rest of your team, by the time the rest of the league starts taking defenses, 1 or 2 defenses are gone. The Steelers defense is still there, and you're comfortable with the rest of your team, sure, go ahead and take it. I think it's worth it. Running back is interesting because when you can look at what the Steelers are going to do, they're going to run the football. Like, this is going to be a run first team. The running backs are going to be very involved. But the biggest drawback of a timeshare of any kind is the fantasy drawback. And it's one of the main reasons why I just am so hesitant to want to take either Najee Harris or Jaylen Warren, just because both guys are legitimate options in the offense. This isn't like Najee's the bell cow and Jalen's a really solid number two, for insurance in case Najee gets hurt or anything like that. No, Jalen's moved beyond that. Jalen's now a very, very reliable, worthy of being a starter type of running back. Like, he's moved past that. And because of that, you have touches that are split, and that hurts their fantasy value. Obviously helps the team because you got the Thunder and Lightning that we've been talking about. And Beathel does bring up a good point here. Says the good thing of a running back timeshare is that they stay healthier longer. It's true. They do stand a better chance of maintaining their health. But Joshua Dobbs here says it's a 1A, 1B situation. That's exactly right. Najee's the 1A, Jalen's the 1B. And that's not a slight to Jalen, and it's not saying, oh, Najee's the good. Najee is going to be the guy that would most likely get the more get more goal line carries, so that helps with touchdowns. But Jalen is probably in line to get more catches, which obviously helps in PPR. And William says here it's a team sport, and when they line up on the field, when they go into each stadium every week, they're not going in there to help your fantasy teams. They're going in there to try to win a football game. And, that's why if you're a fan of the team, it's great that the Steelers have one of the best running back duos in the league. It just doesn't mean a whole bunch for fantasy football. It just doesn't. In terms of when I would take them, I'm actually curious. I'm going to pull up ESPN's fantasy football cheat sheet, and I'm going to see where these guys are ranked, because I actually haven't even looked at it yet. This is the first time. I wasn't even going to just do this because I've done all of this stuff for just Steelers, but I'm like, you know what? Screw this. I'm gonna go and look at this by position, and I'm going to see. Let me pull this up real quick. That is just the top 300. I want top 300. I want positions. Let's get the position. Here we go. All right. Najee Harris is I'm actually curious to see if they have Najee above Jalen. So here's the thing. All right. This kind of solidifies it for me. Najee is the 25th ranked running back on ESPN, and this is for PPR. Jaylen Warren is ranked 26th. They are ranked back to back. That's that's hilarious. And not just ranked back to back in running backs, but ranked back to back overall. Najee's ranked 75th overall, and Jalen's ranked 76th overall. So that tells you that if it goes by overall rankings, they're 8th round picks in a typical 10-team league. They're 8th round picks. And I think that sounds like a huge slight to any of them. And I get that. I understand that. It does sound like a big time slight, because together they're great. Together they had, let's see, if you were to add up their yards from scrimmage last year, I'm going to pull that up too. They both got over 1,000. But if you were to combine them into one amazing running back, it would be arguably the best running back in the league, or at least one of the most productive running backs in the league. Total yards from scrimmage: Najee 1,205, Jaylen Warren 1,154, and combined between the two of them, 12 touchdowns. I mean, there you go. I mean, That's well over 2,300 yards together from scrimmage. They're phenomenal together, but at the same time, man, like it's just hard to take either one of them. Like Najee Harris, yeah, 1,000-yard season, that's great, but he had a 1,000-yard season on the ground while catching only. Let's see, what were his receivers? Yeah, 29 catches for 170 yards. That ain't gonna do it, man. Like that's just not gonna do it. And Jaylen Warren, like he's up there in terms of like, especially for PPR, 61 catches. That's good, but for only 370 yards, neither one of them caught any touchdown passes. And then Jaylen, the rest of his yards, I mean, rushing wise, he had 784 yards and 4 touchdowns. So on the ground, Najee is the number one. He's the go-to on the ground. But, Jaylen, 61 catches last year. It's just neither one of them are great fantasy options. And, that's the best way I can put it. Yeah. But and Brian brings up a good point here, because this is the one thing that I think kind of brings up the whole flexibility thing. Brian says Najee should catch the ball more this year. Smith doesn't like to be predictable, and Russ likes to check down a lot. I don't think it even just falls down to like, hey, here's the reasons why Najee should catch the ball more. I just think it should just stop at Najee should just catch the ball more. He was a really good receiving running back at Alabama, and Ben liked to use him quite a bit during his rookie year. Now, again, it was a lot of the same things where he was a check down option, but he still caught a lot of passes his rookie year. Najee in his rookie year caught 74 passes for 467 yards. Like Najee in his rookie year. Let's put this in perspective with Najee, okay? He's not going to get this many touches. He won't. Just because of Jaylen Warren. But Najee in his rookie year had 1,200 yards rushing and 467 yards receiving, which is a total of 1,667. Caught 74 passes, and he scored 10 total touchdowns. There's a reason why he went to the Pro Bowl. I mean, he put it up. James, for anybody who didn't catch it earlier, James asked, "Where's your new partner? Wasn't he supposed to start today?" Yes, that is correct. He was supposed to start. We called a bit of an audible over the weekend and had Greg go to PNC Park with Jose today to cover the Pirates game. So he's starting on the show tomorrow. So you'll get to meet Greg tomorrow. Excited about that. So Rick, to the point of what I said about Najee, said that's the difference when your OC is Ben instead of Canada. That's true. Yeah. And also Matthew on here brings up something else for in terms of the show's programming, not just this show, but the channel's programming. Just a reminder that the Ramon Foster show is not going until Friday because DK is in Milwaukee. That is correct. The Pirates are in Milwaukee starting tomorrow. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, they're in Milwaukee. So Ramon show will be Friday this week. So those are some programming stuff. But yeah, I mean, like we're past the point where Najee's the bell cow, right? And like Najee was like the main guy in 21 as a rookie because he didn't have a legitimate number 2. He now has one. Like I said, it's not even a number 2. It's more like a 1A, 1B. And I think that's why it makes either Najee or Jaylen just a difficult sell. To me, I wouldn't draft them to be anything more than a flex. That's my opinion. That might sound harsh, but really, if you start getting into 8th round, 9th round, anybody that you're taking by that point, you should already have, let's see, by the 8th round, you've drafted 7, and this is like non-keeper league. So you should already have at least 2 running backs, 2 receivers, a quarterback. Dare I even say a tight end? I would even say 3 receivers for sure. I would not take Najee or Jaylen, either one of them, to be anything more than your number 3 running back and be a flex option, depending on the matchup. That's what and Randy, brought this up and you said Arthur Smith didn't fare well with fantasy owners. No, he did not. I think that there are some options. Like I said, George Pickens, I think, is a good option because first off, right now, it's not like there's like some sort of other wide receiver 2 that's going to be a legitimate, like, oh, well, he's going to take a lot of targets. George Pickens is going to get his targets. I think his receptions will go up this year. I don't think he's going to catch just 60-something passes. I think he's going to catch more than that. I think George Pickens is going to be the guy, barring any trade. Obviously, if they make a big-time trade, then that changes everything. So I would, but just to put the final statement on the running backs, number 3 running back at the absolute highest for either one of them. They're both better than that. And I think if either one of them were in a situation where they're the bell cow, I think they're worthy of that. I think they're worthy of more. But because of the Steelers situation, you can't just don't take them in the 5th round to be your number 2 running back. Don't do it. You're gonna unless one of the other guys gets hurt and they have to be turned into the bell cow, it's not going to work out. Just won't. Other guys. So we can't really talk about talk about the quarterbacks. It's the most important position. It's funny, man. It's funny to look at this because, Kenny Pickett last year, I think, was ranked higher. Russell Wilson is ranked 30th among quarterbacks, and Justin Fields is ranked 34th. So if you're playing in a 10-team league and each team has 2 quarterbacks, that's 20. That means most likely, if that draft goes chalk, neither one of the Steelers quarterbacks are going to be taken. I think that's actually kind of funny. I don't know if I would be that resistant to either Wilson or Fields, but I kind of understand, maybe ESPN is of the opinion that not quite sure what's going to happen. Yes, Russell Wilson is in pole position, but just because he's in pole position doesn't necessarily guarantee that he's a starter. I'm not going to say the word guarantee, but I'll put it this way. I would be shocked if Wilson's not starting in week 1, obviously barring any injuries. And Joshua Dobbs here says, yeah, Russ is a wait and see waiver pickup. And I kind of get that, but I think the main reason why is just because maybe ESPN is of the mindset that maybe the job really isn't decided just yet. And if there's any, it's the same thing with Najee and Jalen. If there's any doubt about who's going to be the guy, then I understand. Okay, just kind of stay away. I understand that, because when you look at this, just in order: Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Pat Mahomes, Joe Burrow, C.J. Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Dak Prescott, Jordan Love, Kyler Murray are the top 10. Then you get to Brock Purdy, Aaron Rodgers, Justin Herbert, Jaden Daniels. Already Jaden Daniels as a rookie at 14th. Kirk Cousins, 15. Caleb Williams, 16. Deshaun Watson, 17. Trevor Lawrence, 18. Tua, 19. Matthew Stafford, 20. I could make some arguments if Russell Wilson is the legitimate starter and puts up the same numbers he did last year, or something comparable to that you could make an argument for that top 20. But again, I think this has to do a lot with, what's the situation. And I think that's why ESPN is kind of staying away. One guy that I always think is completely overlooked, and I don't understand why, is Chris Boswell. Especially last year. Just because that offense, they got into the red zone and couldn't score. So that didn't help matters. And for fantasy owners, if you have a kicker of a team that can get into the red zone and then not score, that's perfect because now you're getting 3 points, 3 or 4 points instead of 1. Right? I mean, so like that's good for you. I'm curious here. What is Chris Boswell ranked? He's not even ranked. Chris Boswell, not even ranked. Harrison Butker, Brandon Aubrey, Justin Tucker, Jake Elliott, Greg Zerline, Fairbarn, McPherson, Moody, Dicker, Santos, Koob, Badgley, Hopkins, Gay. Not even the top 15. I think that's kind of crazy, honestly. I would take Chris Boswell. When he's on his game, he can make field goals, man. That's what he does. He makes field goals, and he's got a leg. The only reason why you might want to stay away from Chris Boswell is if the Steelers do become this amazing red zone team and they are able to punch in, a lot of, for a good percentage of the time they can punch it in and get a touchdown instead of settling for field goals, then yeah, maybe steer away from Chris Boswell in terms of fantasy, but he's as reliable as anybody in the game, in my opinion. So I've always thought Chris Boswell got a bad rap when it comes to fantasy. Are there other guys you can get that are probably a little bit better in terms of fantasy options? Yeah, of course. But I think Chris Boswell's a good guy to have. But still, my number one guy, George Pickens, all the way. Like I said, like I was even talking about earlier, if you are the type of person that likes to take a defense early, 7th, 8th, 9th round, like there's a very realistic chance that the Steelers defense gets taken before both Najee and Jalen are off the board. Like do I think that'll happen in most leagues? No, I don't. But if you get into a league where a lot of people like start taking defenses early, because that is one, like that and kickers, like obviously usually kickers are like right near the end, but defense is one of those positions where in my experience it's been like, okay, once one defense is gone, it's like everybody starts taking a defense. Oh crap, I gotta get my defense. So it's just funny how that works out. And like I said, if it happens to be the 7th round or 8th round in some leagues, wouldn't surprise me. I got time for a couple questions. We've talked for 32 minutes about fantasy football, so we can talk about something else. But any questions you guys have? Like I said, tomorrow Greg is going to be joining the show for the first time. Excited for that. Excited to have him on. Just to get that going, man. To have a co-host here. It's a lot easier to do. It's not as easy to run the show solo. But I think it just makes better for conversation. I think that's one of the reasons why it worked so well whenever I had Williamson on here. But also just because Matt Williamson's such a knowledgeable dude, and he's just a lot of fun to talk football with. But if you guys have any other Steelers questions, bring them. I'll answer 2 or 3 of them. And Joshua Dobbs, I understand it. Really hard to come up with questions in July. I get it, man. Like I get like you're kind of running out of like, okay, man, I don't know what, like, I feel like I've asked every single question. Trust me, it's kind of the same thing on my end too. Right now I'm going through the, positional previews, going through that series on the site, that's a good thing, to do. And, it not only gives, me something to do, but it also gives people something to read, to give themselves, okay, ready for training camp. Here's an entire picture of quarterbacks, of running backs, of receiver and tight end, of, offensive line, defensive line. Okay, here's a good question, Josh. There you go. Who's going to be the third safety? I think if the Steelers had I won't say necessarily that they had their way. I think ideally Deshaun Elliott is the main guy next to Minka. And then DeMonte Casey, whenever they want to run any kind of 3 safety sets, is that guy also back while Elliott can go up in the box. The main reason why I say KZ over Minka is because the last thing you want is for KZ to be the center fielder, and then you have to almost force Minka to get into that, okay, now he's playing more in the box. Now he's playing more in the slot. That's not what you want with Minkah. With Minkah, you want him playing center field. You want him playing the spot, that traditional free safety position. So I would say Minkah next to Deshaun Elliott, and then DeMonte Casey as your third safety. So that's what I would say. Rick asks an interesting question. Is there a 2 in 10 chance that Roman Wilson is this year's Puka? 20% chance. I don't know if I'd quite put it that high, which 20% is not very high. But is it possible? Like more than just like, oh yeah, it's kind of far-fetched. It's not a far-fetched idea. I'll put it that way. It's not completely far-fetched to think that Roman Wilson could break out as like a Puka Nacua type. He does a lot of things really well, and he does things really well that fit really well in Arthur Smith's offense. Primarily, the good thing with Roman Wilson is that he does a very, very good job of attacking defenses down the middle of the field at both the intermediate and deep levels. He's really good at running those crossers. He understands how to run routes in those areas of the field. He did it very well in Michigan. And he's a willing blocker, which obviously is going to help in Arthur Smith's offense. So I'm not going to quite say like 20% chance or something like that, but do I think I just don't like to quantify things, but do I think that it's possible that if the Steelers don't make a trade, that Roman Wilson ends up as like not just the Steelers number 2, but like a legitimate number 2 anywhere in the league in this system? I think it's possible. I don't think it's far-fetched to think that way. And you know, Joshua here says, you know, Puka had Stafford and McVay. McVay is so good at McVay's really, really good at making everything look the same prior to the snap. The Rams ran out of 11 personnel like 91% of the time last year. Like, that's ridiculous. But that's not like, oh, well, you can only run out of 11 personnel. He does that because he wants to make everything look the same before the snap. That way you're not telegraphing anything. Every play looks the same because you got the same personnel almost all the time. I think it's brilliant. I think that's a great way to go. So, and that helps in terms of, like I said, that helps in terms of preventing telegraphing and stuff like that. Just Arthur Smith is a different offensive coordinator. He's more run-oriented. He's more big set, 2 tight end oriented. So that's why I'm hesitant to say that Roman Wilson can just become this guy who's going to light the league on fire with not just, you know, ability, but also production. Really good question from Randy. And I'll close on this one. This is a good question. Chris, is there a player you've interviewed and after the interview thought, wow, what a great person? A lot of people might not like this answer, but I'm still going to say it anyway. Every time, especially whenever I had to ask some hard questions, Deontay Johnson was always very honest and, dare I even say, carried himself with a bit of humility with those answers. You know, the idea that he was some sort of toxic human being in that locker room, now, granted, I wasn't there last year. I wasn't in that locker room throughout 2023. And even then, whenever media members say that we're in the locker room, yes, we're in the locker room, but we're not in the locker room all the time. We're in there for a fraction of the time. And every time the locker room's open, players are very well know when media's in there. But I remember having several. I'll go back to a specific time where I interviewed Deontay, and I wrote this is back whenever the staff was contributing on our site to the Friday Insider, and I ended up like leading the Friday Insider that week because I had a one-on-one conversation. This is after all the stuff had come out about him and Mitch Trubisky getting into a fight at halftime during the Jets game. And I remember asking him questions about that and asking some hard questions, just about that situation, about, some other things, about wanting to, or about feeling compelled to be a leader in that room, and him just being as honest as he could and being like, listen, that's not a strength for me. I'm not a natural born leader. I'm not a guy who just wants to go into a room and be the assertive one and be the guy who's going to say, okay, here, everyone, follow me. Not everybody's born that way. And Deontay's, more of a soft-spoken guy. And I just remember being blown away by a lot of the answers in that interview. I thought that was it was eye-opening to me, even. That would be one. I don't know if to say like what a great person, but I remember that one specific interview had a lot, because I was when you go into an interview, based off of precedent, off of the way they've, answered questions either in previous one-on-ones or the way they answer questions in media scrums and stuff like that. You kind of go with a kind of a bit preconceived notion about how this might go. And I was just completely blown away. I was just like, that went way better than I thought it would. And it's just, it's refreshing when that does happen. So that's my experience. And like I said, when some people are like, well, that conflicts with what happened last year and the reports that, the Steelers traded him because, things were deteriorating with their relationship. That very well may be the case. I don't know, because I can't confirm that because I wasn't there last year. So I'm not going to sit here and try to pretend and say, oh, well, just because Deontay was this way in 2022 means that he was definitely that way in 23. Like, no, like every season's different. So, but I can confidently say that at least that interview, and then even then, like one-on-ones that I had with him after that, he was one of those guys that I felt like I could, if I wanted to get like a different perspective, a one-on-one perspective on something going on with the offense, there were a few different guys on that offense that I would go to, and Deontay was one of them. Deontay, Mason Cole was another really good one to talk to. Zach Gentry was a really good one to talk to. He was really well-spoken, very, very smart football player, knew what was going on. There were several different guys that I really like. I wanted to get something different, a different perspective on what's going on with the offense, especially that season when they started off 2-6 and they just had so many offensive struggles. Like, that was one where I was just like, I wanted to find guys that I knew that could give me more than just what we would get out of those media scrums, which is my job as a reporter. My job as a reporter, as a beat reporter, is to take you to get Steelers coverage that you won't get anywhere else, right? And to give you a different perspective inside that room. And you find your guys that you like to go to. Everybody has their guys, and some guys, some reporters, they like to go to the same guys you do. It just happens. There are some Mason, and I think that's one of the reasons why Mason Cole won the Chief Award in 2022, because he was so good with the media, not just in scrums, but in one-on-one situations with all of us who cover the team. So there are just some guys that are really, really good, and I'm really looking. If you can't tell, I'm excited about getting back into that environment, to getting back to covering the team on a daily basis, getting to talk to these guys, and getting to get back to that type of work, and then blend that with the analysis, the chalk talk stuff that I've done over the past year. I'm excited about that. So I think that's a good place to end the show. Tomorrow, like I said, Greg McAfee, there is no Pirates game that he will be attending. The Pirates are on the road in Milwaukee, so Pirates games won't get in the way. Greg McAfee is going to join the show. I'm excited about it, to have him, as a new co-host on the show. Going to aim to obviously do a show every day for the rest of this week, because, like I said, in case you didn't hear on Friday, most likely not any shows next week. I'm I'm going to be covering all 4 days worth of events at the MLB All-Star Game, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. And then after that, I am spending the next 4 days packing, spending last few days with friends and family before we make our final move up. Because, man, 2 weeks from Wednesday, in 16 days, training camp. Players report to training camp at St. Vincent College. It is almost here, guys. Almost. But excited about tomorrow, bringing Greg onto the show. And appreciate you guys tuning in today. We'll catch you guys on the flippity flip. See you later.